Well, as a child of the late 1980s and 1990s, growing up cutting my teeth on baseball during that time, there were few baseball players around that generated as much interest and fascination as the great Nolan Ryan. And as Phillies fans, there were a number of moments during Nolan Ryan's career that connected him to the Phillies. Of course, Game 5 of the 1980 NLCS being one of them, and then that unbelievable chase that he and Steve Carlton with back and forth for the strikeout record, the all-time strikeout record in 1983 and 84. Just amazing stuff that Nolan Ryan has been connected to with the Phillies. And joining me to talk about a really great new book about the life of Nolan Ryan is Tim Brown. Here's the book. If you're watching this on the YouTube, Nolan, The Singular Life of an American Original. It's a fascinating read. Tim, thank you so much for joining me here on Hittin' Season. How are you?
I'm terrific, John. Thanks for having me, man.
It's great to talk to you. I know you got a chance to sit down with Nolan Ryan, but you also worked with his wife Ruth and his 3 kids in putting this book together. And what was the impetus behind deciding to write about Nolan Ryan? What are you saying as now he's later in life? He's 30 some odd years away from the game right now. Where is he right now in life?
Well, he's literally he's in outside of Round Rock, and they have the minor league team in Round Rock, and he's got his ranches, and he still gets in the car with his dog Buddy and drives to the ranch. And like he told me, I like to be around when the calves hit the ground. Um, and they've got grandchildren, and he still has all his businesses, the Nolan Ryan Beef, and all that. Figuratively, I think he's where, and I think this is sort of where we related a little bit, is 78, 79 years old. He's been married to Ruth for going on 60 years.
Man.
And like a lot of us, I think I found Nolan in a place where he was looking back and making some decisions about what he did well and what he might want back. And there weren't a lot of those, honestly. I think he's just sort of considering how it all went,
Yeah.
and I think he's pretty satisfied. Like all of us, his body's fallen apart a little bit, but I found him to be in a good mood and sort of, I think, happy to talk about it all again.
You can read all of the records that Nolan Ryan set, and I think you mentioned in his book that he has 53 pitching records, which is more than any other pitcher in Major League Baseball history. But there's just 27 Major League seasons, seven no-hitters. Seven, folks, hear that. 7 no-hitters, 12 one-hitters. So that means there were 12 other times he was one hit away from a no-hitter. 18 two-hitters, 31 three-hitters, career strikeouts 5,714. Just the number of innings, the number of seasons, the number of games that he pitched in. Can you try to articulate to people who did not watch this man, not only in his prime, but the fact that he had an extended level of success into his 40s, and the fact that he did all of this, amassed all of these innings, all of these games, and was one of the hardest throwers in baseball? It just doesn't compute with what we know about baseball today.
Right, John. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to do this book is because I have found myself over the past, say, 15 years, watching starting pitchers come off the mound, give the ball up 5 1/3, 5 2/3, get a standing ovation, tip the cap, great
Right.
job, way to go, buddy.
Yeah.
You see no hitters end in the 7th inning because they're at 104 pitches. And I'd be watching and I'd think, oh, where have you gone, Nolan Ryan? Um, you know,
Yeah.
how did this happen? And so I went to find Nolan Ryan. That was sort of what the book was about. But, you know, here's an example. So, arguably the best 3 pitchers of the generation that's just ending: Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, Clayton Kershaw, right?
Hmm.
I mean, you could
Yeah.
bicker, but they pitched a combined, I want to say, 60 years. They threw a combined 63 complete games.
Hmm.
Nolan Ryan in 27 years threw 222 complete games. And there are guys with plenty more than that. It was sort of a generational thing. If you liked your Seaver, or you liked your Jenkins, or you like your Carlton, or whomever, it was just sort of a different world there. And when you take Nolan Ryan retired in '93. Justin Verlander's rookie year was 2005. That's 12 years. The
Hmm.
game changed that much in 12 years. And I just sort of wonder. I mean, we all saw why it happened, right? You have little leaguers and high school kids and college pitchers, and you know their arms were being abused, and this was the correction, right?
Yeah.
But now, in the meantime, we chase velocity. We're velocity obsessed while being super risk averse, and I just don't think those two things get along. Whereas in Nolan's day, particularly in his prime, and a lot of guys' primes, that those things weren't. You threw as hard as you threw, you lasted as long as you could last. I'll let you know when you can leave the game. There'll be
Yeah.
no like looking over to the dugout like, hey, I got my five. I'm
Yeah.
leading.
Yeah.
Come get me. One of the great old lines from Nolan was, it's late in the game and he's gasping and there's runners on and the lead's in jeopardy and Tom House goes out to the mound and says, "How you doing?" And Nolan says, "I'm honestly I'm doing terrible, but I'm a lot better than anything you got in that bullpen."
Right.
And I think so. That's sort of the baseball element of this. I think beyond the numbers, anyone can look at the numbers. I was really sort of interested in the legacy of it, right? The more than the numbers, the way he pitched, the way he carried himself, who he was, what it meant to face him, what it meant to be his teammate. And, I don't think um, anybody, he saved a franchise in Texas.
Yeah.
He became sort of synonymous with Texas. And so there was a lot of elements to this that just went beyond, okay, I can read his baseball reference page, but there was so
Right.
much more to the man and the pitcher than just that.
Yeah, and so how does he feel about where the game is right now? Because like you mentioned, he probably even at 70, 60% in the eighth inning at 140 pitches is probably still better back in those days than whatever bullpen arm you would have called on. Bullpens today are so much different now. Everybody comes out, and I would say, the top three guys in virtually every team's bullpen is better, more electric than maybe all but the top three relievers in all of baseball during the time that Nolan Ryan was pitching. So there's no incentive for managers to keep starting pitchers in games longer and stretch them in the way that Ryan and Carlton and like Burt Blyleven and all those different kinds of guys were stretched back in those days. How does he view the game now? Because it's obviously very much different.
Well, we know that he tried to resurrect sort of something more like himself when he was in the front offices with the Houston Astros and the Texas Rangers. That he still believed that the next Nolan Ryan could actually be out there, and that just the way the game was going, it wasn't going to allow it.
Yeah.
I mean, the next Nolan Ryan could have come and gone, right? The next Nolan Ryan may be in somebody's minor league system, but we'll never know. He's
Yeah.
never thrown more than 100 pitches. He's never pitched on 3 days rest. He's never pitched himself out of a problem in the eighth inning. So Nolan tried to drag it back into the 70s and the 80s, and it didn't go great. The guys just hadn't by then. By the time you get to the minor leagues, the die is cast a little bit, and you've already been so protected over the years. And I get it, and nothing bugs me more than someone who brings up a problem but doesn't come with a solution as
Yeah.
well. But I don't know if there's a solution. But I will say that it doesn't appear to me that injuries are down. The whole game rests on an inch-long piece of ligament in an elbow.
Yeah.
It just teeters there on top of that thing. And we haven't solved that yet. Limiting innings and limiting pitches, and allowing, actually chasing all this velocity has sort of left us in the same spot that we were before we started doing all this.
Oh, and that's what's amazing about Ryan is he never chased velocity. He just had it. He was just blessed with it. And I think that's what's hard for people to understand is Nolan Ryan would have fit in beautifully with today's pitchers with the arsenal that he had and the stuff that he had and yet he never won a Cy Young award, right? I mean,
Wow,
like
right?
One of the most bizarre things is this guy had never won a Cy Young award, and you look at his win-loss record. You know, he had a lot of losses, a lot of seasons. He had some seasons with very high ERAs. You know, so he was not a perfect pitcher by any stretch of the imagination, but he wasn't a guy who had to chase the velocity that a lot of guys are chasing now, and that's what made him so unique, I think. And you also spend a lot of time in the book talking about the man himself, and I don't want to lose that because the baseball stuff is obviously fascinating. But there's a number of stories that you relate in the book, and there's one about him paying college tuition for an Astros bat boy whose dad has died. I'd like for you to tell that one.
Yeah, I was really taken by this story. And one of Nolan's teammates said, in the process of reporting out this book, he said, "Hey, have you talked to Sid Holland?" And I said, "No, who's Sid Holland?" And he said, "You need to go find Sid Holland." And so I did. And Sid Holland runs a batting cage in Houston. Um, and the backstory is Sid's father was a guy named Virgil. And Virgil ran the umpire's room at the Astrodome from the day it opened until the day he died. And uh, Sid, as a young teenager, would get on the bus from Trinity Gardens neighborhood in Houston and after school and go help his dad at the Astrodome. And eventually he would roll into bat boy, ball boy, clubby,
Mm.
all the things that young, generally men do at ballparks. And Sid's Sid's dad died young and left Sid and his mom and Sid's siblings, uh, to their lives, and it was very difficult. But Sid kept showing up at the Astrodome, and he would give his paychecks to his mom. And in the meantime, he was also playing ball, and he was, hoped to be a ball player like his heroes over at the Astrodome. Well, one day in the dugout, Nolan was along with a handful of other players, asked Sid near his senior year in high school, "Hey Sid, what are you going to do? You going to go play ball? You going to college?" And Sid said, "Well, I would like to, but these things happen, and I don't have a lot of money, and there's not a lot of scholarships out there, so I guess I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing." And Nolan said, "Hey, follow me." And Nolan cut him three checks,
Hmm.
one for room and board, one for tuition, and one to fly him to Texas Pan American so he can go to school and play baseball. And Sid eventually got a scholarship. He got drafted by the Rangers, and one day they bump into each other. Nolan toward the end of his career, Sid just at the beginning of his career. And Sid said, "Hey, Nolan, I just want to let you know that I'm going to pay you back." And Nolan said, "Sid, just be kind to the next person. Pay it
Yeah.
forward. That's all I ask." And so he has. That's what he's done with his batting cage.
That is such a fun story. And talk a little bit about his life growing up. I know his dad was a hard worker, and Nolan obviously was a tireless worker. You could see that in the amount of innings that he pitched and how he grinded out. I think you described him in the book as a Nolan as a hard man who did hard things. You know, I think, and I thought, man, I've never talked to the guy, but that sounds about right.
Yeah. Um, I think the metaphor for me all along was when Nolan was a boy in Alvin, Texas. His job was to paint the house, and he never knew when this duty would fall to him. But he would come home from school one day, and there would be, uh, you know, 10 new paint cans in the garage and a couple fresh brushes, and he knew it was time to paint the house again.
Hmm.
And his dad was a tough guy who worked two jobs, and Nolan knew that there was an expectation, that hard work was expected, that jobs were to be completed. And from the moment that job began, one brushstroke meant all of the brushstrokes. You
Hmm.
got it done. You finished it. And I think that sort of symbolizes the man, the life, the career. One brushstroke means all the brushstrokes. You finish the job and you do it well. And his dad would come home from work every day and he would look at the house and he'd nod or he'd point. You'd rather have the nod because the point meant something was wrong.
Yeah.
And so that's how I think Nolan sort of learned what responsibility and showing up and working hard and answering to the people who expect things of you.
I thought one of the most surprising things, we mentioned the fact that he'd never won a Cy Young Award. I thought one of the other fascinating things, and I didn't realize this until I saw it in your book, was he had never won a World Series and only went to one World Series in his rookie season. Actually, he did win a World Series. I'm sorry, with the
Right.
1969 Mets. He won the World. He never won a World Series game. I think is what, and he got earned a save in that 1969 Miracle Mets World Series, but then never appeared in another World Series after that. And I wonder if he looks back on that Game 5 against the Phillies. I mean, he was 3 innings away, and he had the ball in his hand with a 3-run lead in the 7th inning to get back to his second World Series, and the Phillies kind of took that away. And we remember it obviously euphorically, but I imagine for Nolan Ryan that had to be a very, very difficult pill to swallow.
Yeah, I think in a career that doesn't hold a lot of regrets for him, I think he felt like he emptied it out about as well as a man can. That one sticks to him, I think in particular because that's the sort of game that Nolan gets better, finishes it out, and he didn't. And I think he thinks about if that were the game. And you're right, he was a very young man with the Mets then, and I think a lot of them. Seaver was another guy who
Yeah.
never went back to a World Series after that one. Um, all assumed that they were going to go back, and I think that was their chance. I think '86 was another year. Uh, they had a good team and they had the
Angel.
Mets down,
Hmm.
right? And if they had won that game 6 with Mike Scott,
Right.
who at the time was unhittable, waiting
Yeah.
in game 7, or was it 4 and 5, whatever the numbers were. Um, but those two, I think those two series are the ones that sort of stick with him still, even in spite of all the other stuff that may have happened.
I forgot about the 1986 team. Yeah, that was man, heartbreaking for the guy. I think for a lot of fans who like, they're kind of in this online clip verse. They've seen the Nolan Ryan brawl with Robin Ventura, and you talk about that in your book a little bit. I wonder how he looks back on that epic brawl that he had, where he had Nolan Ryan in the headlock and was punching him on the top of the head, and what their relationship is now, these many years later.
Yeah, well, one of the challenges of writing a book, John, like this about someone who is so well known that people just assume, oh, I already know everything about Nolan
Yeah.
Ryan. I've read about Nolan Ryan. I've thought about Nolan Ryan. I see his numbers. Is what are you going to provide people that they haven't seen before? And I think the way I approached the Robin Ventura uh, brouhaha uh, was almost 20 years later. Nolan's president of the Rangers, and Robin is going to manage his first game for the White Sox. I think this is 2012 in Texas.
Hmm.
And Nolan, before the game, turns to his PR guy, been there forever, John Blake, and says, I feel bad that they're going to boo Robin here today with a full ballpark and it's opening day and it's a new job for him.
Yeah.
And John looked at him and said, "No, they've been booing him for years here. I don't. It's not going to be any different than it ever was." And Nolan said, "I still feel bad about it." So he went down pre-game and met with Robin and sort of they buried the hatchet a little bit. They shook hands. They wished each other luck. Robin told him, "Hey, you've done a great job here," and Nolan told him, "You're going to be a great manager." And I think they finally sort of finished off whatever started on that mound in Texas 19 years before.
That was a heat of the moment thing. Boys will be boys, right, Tim? I mean, that's how that
Dude,
goes.
I'll tell you what, I don't know how much time you've spent in Texas, but you cannot walk into a sports bar or really any kind of restaurant and not see a picture of poor Robin Ventura, who was this terrific player, a really
Yes, he
elegant,
was.
good player,
Yeah.
uh, in the crook of Nolan's arm. And I just feel bad. This is what this guy is remembered for. I really tried to have a lot of empathy for him going into this thing because you make one decision that maybe you'd probably like to have back,
Yeah.
probably. And, it's still now, all these years later, 33 years later, what you're remembered for. And conversely, that was sort of Nolan's sort of swan song. That was
Yeah.
his, he was only had a couple months left in his career, and that really sort of sort of cemented his status in Texas after all those years. This is how you ride into the sunset, by
Yeah.
whooping a kid who had the gall to come out onto your mound, and that's he was a hero going into that thing, but then he became legendary.
Yeah. Heroes get remembered, but legends never die, right? Isn't that the line from the Sandlot? At
That's
100% right.
exactly it.
Well,
Yes.
it's a terrific book about a legend, Tim, and it's a fascinating read. And there's a whole generation of baseball fans who didn't get to watch Nolan Ryan, who should absolutely get this book. Again, I'm going to show it for everybody. Nolan, The Singular Life of an American Original. Tim Brown, thank you so much for joining me here on Hittin' Season to talk about it. I really appreciate it.
John, it's been a treat. Take care, man.